Fire was his only companion now, a flickering heartbeat in the crushing dark. His plan had been perfect, his confidence absolute. But sitting there, with the gnawing emptiness in his stomach and the ice clinging to his soul, he knew one thing. The wilderness doesn't care about your plans. It only cares about your mistakes. We invite you to listen to the story. It began just 2 weeks earlier, with a clear sky and a heart full of ambition. He was embarking on a 30-day solo survival challenge, a test of the skills he had honed for years. Every piece of gear was carefully selected, every step into the wild, a deliberate move. This wasn't just a trip. It was a statement. He believed that modern man had grown soft, disconnected from the primal instincts that once ensured our survival. His goal was to prove that those instincts were not lost, merely dormant. The first few days were a masterclass in bushcraft. He located a viable water source, identified edible plants, and even managed to catch a small fish, a welcome boost to his morale. He moved through the landscape with an easy grace, reading the terrain like a well-loved book. His confidence was his sharpest tool, and at that moment, it felt unbreakable. He found a perfect location for his base camp, a sheltered clearing with access to both water and firewood. But a subtle shift was occurring in the air, a change he was too focused to notice. The arrogance of a well-laid plan is that it assumes the world will follow its script. The winds began to carry a different message, a colder, sharper whisper through the pines. He continued his routines, blissfully unaware that his challenge was about to become a genuine crisis. The world was painted in the vibrant colors of autumn, a beautiful deception. His fishing efforts paid off again, providing a small but vital source of protein. From his vantage point on a small ridge, he surveyed his temporary kingdom, feeling like a monarch of the wild. He explored deeper into the woods, mapping out the resources in his immediate area. This was the core of survival, not just enduring, but understanding and integrating with the environment. He felt a profound connection to the generations of hunters and gatherers who walked these lands before him. Then, on the 5th day, the first snowflake fell. It was beautiful, a single, delicate crystal melting on his sleeve. Then came another, and another. He reached into a stream, the water now bitingly cold. A premonition, a flicker of unease, finally broke through his confidence. The forecast had predicted mild weather for another month. It was his first major lesson. Nature writes its own forecasts. The river, once a life-giving artery, was now a threat, a chilling reminder of how quickly things could change. He retreated to his camp, his mind racing. His gear was for autumn, not for a sudden, deep freeze. His leisurely pace was replaced by a frantic urgency. He needed more firewood, much more. The rhythmic swing of his axe was a drumbeat against the encroaching silence of the snow. He took inventory of his supplies, a knot tightening in his stomach. His calculations were now dangerously obsolete. What would you do in this situation? When your plan completely falls apart, what's the first step you take? Let us know in the comments. He foraged for anything that could supplement his diet, but the snow was already blanketing the forest floor. His small camp, which had felt so secure, now seemed fragile and exposed. The world was shrinking, the vast forest becoming a cold white prison. Every small plant, every potential resource, was a treasure he had previously overlooked. He had brought hunting tools, more as a test of skill than a necessity. Now, his bow was no longer a hobbyist's toy. It was a critical tool for survival. He spent hours digging for roots, his fingers growing numb from the cold earth. Every calorie was a victory. The camaraderie of a shared fire felt like a distant dream. Out here, the only warmth came from his own labor. His knife was his most essential possession, a tool for everything from preparing food to making tinder. The relentless work of processing firewood became his entire world. It was a simple, brutal equation. No wood, no fire. No fire, no life. He was forced to move camp, searching for a more sheltered location, a decision that cost him precious energy. The sight of his vehicle, parked miles away, was a ghost in his memory, a symbol of a world he might not return to. The snow was relentless, piling up in deep drifts. The landscape was now alien and hostile. His reflection in the polished blade of his knife showed a different man. Gaunt, weary, and stripped of all arrogance. The cold was a physical entity, a predator that stalked him relentlessly. He gathered snow to melt for water, a laborious process that consumed vital fuel. Rest was a luxury he couldn't afford. Even when sitting, he was planning his next move, calculating his dwindling odds. His mind began to play tricks on him, the isolation amplifying every fear. He checked his snares, only to find them empty and frozen. Hope was becoming a scarce commodity. But one thing he could always create was fire. It was more than warmth. It was defiance. He cooked a meager meal of dried rations and foraged roots. It tasted like the finest banquet he had ever known. He whittled a piece of wood, not for any purpose, but simply to keep his hands and mind occupied. The log he sat on was his throne, his church pew, and his dinner table all in one. A small bird, a little feathered friend named Pip, landed nearby, a tiny fleeting sign of life in the white expanse. It was a reminder that he wasn't entirely alone. Inside his tent, the world was reduced to the essentials: warmth, shelter, and the steam from his cooking pot. Every action was deliberate, conserving energy, preserving heat. The campfire was the center of his universe. He huddled close, absorbing its life-giving energy. He stared into the flames, seeing not just burning wood, but the flickering image of his own will to survive. He had to ration his food with brutal discipline. A few bites were all that separated him from starvation. The loneliness was profound. He started talking to himself, not out of madness, but to hear a human voice. He tried to keep his gear organized, a small act of control in a world of chaos. His cooking became a sacred ritual, a moment of normalcy in an abnormal existence. He focused on the task at hand, blocking out the overwhelming fear that waited at the edges of his thoughts. Each meal was a strategic victory against the relentless advance of hunger and cold. This was the reality of survival, stripped of all romance. It was a grueling, monotonous, and terrifying ordeal. He took a moment to document his situation, a message in a bottle for whoever might find it. He fed the fire, his constant, hungry companion. It demanded to be paid in wood and effort, and he always paid his due. There's a psychological battle in long-term survival that's rarely discussed. How do you think you'd cope with total isolation? He crafted a new tool from a sturdy branch, adapting to his needs with what the forest provided. Every rustle in the woods, every snap of a twig, was a potential threat or a potential meal. His senses were on a razor's edge. He finally had a stroke of luck. A rabbit had found its way into one of his snares. The relief was so powerful, it brought him to his knees. This was more than just food. It was a reprieve. He prepared the meat with a reverence he had never known. Not a single part would be wasted. This was the brutal transaction of the wild. For him to live, something else had to die. He shared a small piece with Pip, who had become his silent confidant through the ordeal. The smell of roasting meat was an intoxicating perfume, a scent he had only dreamed of for days. He cooked it slowly, carefully. A mistake now, like burning the meat, would be a devastating blow. This single meal represented a turning point, a renewal of his strength and his will to fight. With renewed energy, he worked on improving his shelter, reinforcing it against the wind and snow. He knew he couldn't rely on luck. He had to create his own opportunities. The forest no longer felt like a prison, but a challenging partner in a difficult dance. His fire burned brighter, hotter, a reflection of the rekindled hope within him. He was no longer just a visitor in the wild. He was a part of it, living by its harsh but honest rules. He tended to his tasks with a focused calm, the panic replaced by a grim determination. Each sizzle from the pan was a note in the symphony of survival. The fire was a living thing, with its own moods and appetites. He had learned its language. He was thinner, weathered, and marked by the ordeal, but his eyes held a new kind of strength. He had been stripped down to his essential self, and what he found was tougher than he ever imagined. He allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection, a brief pause in the constant struggle. He slowly roasted a piece of meat over the open flame, a simple act of profound significance. The warmth spread through him, chasing away the deep, bone-aching cold. He ate slowly, savoring every molecule of nourishment. This was the taste of life itself. He held the food in his hand, a tangible symbol of his victory over despair. It was a feast fit for a king, though his throne was a fallen log and his kingdom a snow-covered patch of woods. He used his knife to carve the precious meat, a tool of both creation and sustenance. He made a simple broth from the bones, extracting every last bit of nutrition. Waste was a sin. The wilderness did not forgive. This quiet moment of eating was his reward for days of grueling effort and unwavering resolve. He looked at the small bird, Pip, who chirped as if in celebration. Life recognized life. There was a new wisdom in his eyes, an understanding that could only be earned through hardship. He finished his meal, not with the frantic hunger of a starving man, but with the deliberate pace of a survivor. His gear was worn, but it had served him well. He had chosen wisely. A hot meal in a cold environment is more than just calories. It's a psychological weapon against the cold and despair. It refuels the body, but more importantly, it refuels the spirit. He sat on a rock, feeling the strength return to his limbs, the fog of exhaustion beginning to lift. He planned his next steps, not with the arrogance of his old self, but with the humble caution of one who has known failure. He drank the melted snow, now boiled and safe. Hydration was just as critical as food. Survival is a holistic challenge. Physical, mental, and emotional strength are all interwoven. If one fails, they all fail. His simple bowl felt like the finest porcelain. Perspective is a powerful thing. He held the warm bowl, a small shield against the vast indifference of the wild. After days of relentless struggle, a moment of peace was a treasure beyond measure. He found a rhythm with the forest, a pattern of work, rest, and sustenance. He was no longer fighting against nature. He was working with it. This experience had reforged him. He had entered the woods as one man and would leave as another. He had faced the void and had not blinked. He began to explore again, not for expansion, but for opportunity, for a sign of a break in the weather. He stood by his fire, a silent sentinel in the woods, waiting for his chance. The fire was a beacon of hope, a signal to himself that he was still there, still fighting. He examined his equipment, making small repairs, ensuring everything was ready for the long walkout. His tent was more than a shelter now. It was home. He spent the long nights by the fire, planning his route, conserving his energy for the final push. He began to pack his gear, a slow and methodical process. There was no room for error. The weather finally showed signs of breaking. The relentless snowfall eased, and the wind began to die down. He worked quickly, breaking down his camp with an efficiency born of desperation and practice. Every item was packed in its place. His survival now depended on his speed and endurance. One last night in the tent, one last meal before the arduous journey back to the world he had left behind. He built up the fire, a final offering to the forest that had been both his adversary and his teacher. It had been a brutal, unforgiving classroom, but the lessons were profound. He would carry the memory of this fire, this cold, and this hunger with him for the rest of his life. He allowed himself a small comfort, a habit from his old life that felt both alien and reassuring. He held his knife, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of his own resilience. He had been sharp enough. He had been strong enough. He sat by the campfire, watching the embers die, mirroring the end of his ordeal. The darkness that crept in was no longer terrifying. He had faced it, and found his own light within. The silence of the woods was no longer empty, but filled with the echoes of his own quiet strength. He was alone, but no longer lonely. He had found a companionship in himself that he never knew existed. He drank the last of his water, a final toast to the indomitable nature of the human spirit. As dawn approached, he prepared for the final act of his journey, the walk out. With a small light to guide his first steps, he broke camp for the last time. The ordeal was over, but the story was just beginning. He was bringing back more than he had left with. He checked his position one last time, his link to the modern world he had so eagerly abandoned. It was time to go home. The journey back was a blur of exhaustion and determination, each step a testament to his will. He was a different man now. The forest had stripped him of his pride and given him something far more valuable in return: humility. He looked back one last time at the wilderness that had nearly claimed him. There was no anger, only a profound sense of respect. That night, under a solid roof, the familiar comforts of civilization felt strange and overwhelming. He had survived, but the wild would forever be a part of him. A faint light on the horizon. Not the dawn, but the distant glow of the world he was returning to. The weight of his pack was nothing compared to the weight of the experience he now carried. He documented the end of his journey, not with a triumphant tone he had planned, but with a quiet sense of awe. He had gone looking for a challenge, and had found a revelation. Sleep did not come easy. The silence of his room was deafening, compared to the subtle language of the forest. He shouldered his pack for the last mile, the final steps of a journey that had taken him to the edge of his limits. The rising sun felt like a welcome, a symbol of his own rebirth. He was no longer just a man in the woods. He was a man who had been through the woods, and there is a profound difference. He had learned that survival isn't about conquering nature. It's about finding your place within it. It's about bending so you do not break. The simple act of cooking a meal now held a new significance. He had learned the true value of warmth, of food, of life itself. These were not just skills for the wilderness. They were lessons for life. Patience, resourcefulness, and an unbreakable will. He had sat on logs like this one, contemplating his own mortality. He had stared into fires like this one, and found the strength to continue. He had cooked meals like this one, each one a victory against the encroaching darkness. The forest gives nothing for free. Everything is earned through effort, intelligence, and respect. What are your thoughts on this? Could you endure such an ordeal? He had learned that community, even the memory of it, is a powerful survival tool. He was one man, but he carried the spirit of all who had struggled before him. He understood that true strength isn't about being invincible. It's about getting back up, time and time again, after you've been knocked down. It's about tending to your own fire when the world around you grows cold. It's about finding nourishment in the smallest of victories. And it's about taking a moment to appreciate the warmth, no matter how fleeting it may be. He was a survivor, Not just of the wilderness, but of his own limitations. And that was the greatest prize the forest had to offer. He had gone into the wild to test himself against the elements. He had gone to prove he could endure. But in the end, the wilderness wasn't the thing he had to overcome. It was himself, his pride, his arrogance, and his fear. He had won that battle, not with force, but with resilience. And the quiet calm of the forest was his reward. He would return to the world, but he would never truly leave this place. It was now a part of his soul, a reminder of what he was capable of. He packed his last items, the finality of the act settling upon him. The challenge was complete. The journey was over. He knelt one last time, a silent gesture of thanks to the forest floor that had sustained him. He rolled up his belongings, each item holding a story, a memory of the struggle. The final walkout was not one of escape, but of graduation. He had passed the test. He organized his pack, the familiar weight, a comfort on his shoulders. He covered the traces of his fire, leaving the forest as he had found it. It was the final sign of respect. With his hood up against the lingering chill, he turned his back on his camp and began the long walk home. He was ready to face the world again, armed with a new perspective and an unshakable inner strength. His story was not one of man versus nature. It was a story of man learning from nature. And that is a lesson that lasts a lifetime. He moved with a new purpose, his steps lighter than when he arrived. The weight of his pride had been lifted, replaced by the lightness of wisdom. He paused to examine a branch, not as a resource, but with simple curiosity and appreciation. He saw the forest not as a collection of resources, but as a complex interconnected web of life. And he was grateful to have been a small temporary part of it. Each footprint in the snow told a story of his journey, a path of struggle and perseverance. He walked tall, not with arrogance, but with the quiet dignity of a man who has faced his deepest fears and emerged victorious. The forest seemed to part for him, its secrets now shared, its lessons now learned. He carried the silence of the woods with him, a peaceful anchor in the noisy world that awaited. His pack felt like a part of him, a shell he had grown to protect himself and his precious gear. He stopped at the stream where his ordeal began. The water flowed, indifferent and eternal. He saw his reflection, but it was a stranger looking back, a man he was proud to be. He drank from the stream, a final communion with the wild. He had been humbled, tested, and ultimately transformed. And then he saw it, the edge of the forest, the end of the trial. He stepped out of the tree line and into the open field, a symbolic return to the world of men. He stood there for a moment, letting the sun warm his face. It felt like a benediction. The world was the same, but he was forever changed. His journey was complete, his story ready to be told. He had faced the wilderness and found his humanity. He walked toward his vehicle, not as a conqueror returning from war, but as a student returning from the greatest school on earth. He spotted the van, a mundane object that now seemed like a miraculous chariot. He stowed his gear, each piece a sacred relic from his time in the wild. He allowed himself a simple drink, a taste of civilization that was both sweet and foreign. The world inside the van was a time capsule from a life he had left behind. He had changed in ways he was only beginning to understand. He closed the door on the wilderness, but he would never close the door on its lessons. If you enjoyed this story, please like and share this video, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the THUY Survival Life channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an